Hello, LinkedIn family, and welcome to a new LinkedIn live session. I'm very excited to have with us today Professor Yossi Sheffi from MIT, who delivered a great keynote at the Makers and Movers Summit last week. And we have him today to answer some of your questions. For those of you who may still not know Professor Yossi Sheffi, though I doubt there's too many of you, but I'll give a quick introduction. He is the professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he serves as director of the Center for Transportation and Logistics. He's an expert in systems optimization, risk analysis, and supply chain management. He's the author of many books. I must share that my first book, when I started in supply chain consulting about 6, 7, 8 years ago, it was actually The Resilient Enterprise, The Power of Resilience. Now, The Power of Resilience, I actually have it here, Professor, to prove it was the first supply chain book I read, and he just wrote as well The New Abnormal, which is a recently published book and which I would recommend all of you to read. So, Professor, without further ado, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Radu.
And I want to start one question that popped out, and there were many questions that popped out, and I want to encourage people to comment, as always, in the comment section, and I will take their questions. One of the ones that popped up, and it's a big challenge recently, it's the lack of equipment and the lack of containers and the fact that there's a problematic shortage in terms of moving the boxes from one trade to another trade, depending on the world, depending on the consumers. I wanted to ask you, how do you see this, Professor, and how does that shape up to be a potential big crisis in the next couple of months?
Okay, if you can tell me how the pandemic is going to develop, I'll tell you how this is going to happen. we are living in time when the world is really being led by the pandemic. So areas of the world, when like the United States now is living through, explosion in cases. This has part of the EU, of course, the northern Holland, Brussels, a lot of the part of the EU that were not a problem before. England, of course, UK. Anyway, the issue is that there are random areas of the world that open and close, and this affects demand. And people are trying to forecast what will be the case 2 months from now, 3 months from now. This is what really affects the movement of container. It's not so much the shortage, there's misalignment. They're just, in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it's a question of, now, there are several pressures that yet are not being relieved. One of them is the lack of air cargo, the fact that passenger planes are not flying, so we don't have the belly cargo. And the fact that there is, by the way, at least in the United States, incoming container movement to LA Long Beach is at a record high. I mean, it's lots of incoming movement. It looks like retailers are expecting actually a pretty hefty Christmas. People are at home and they may be buying a lot more. Now, the way they'll be buying, there'll be a lot more e-commerce, of course, a lot less going to the stores. In the United States, you see closing many states that with Republican governors that said that it's not true. It's now suddenly closing the states because the hospitals are being overwhelmed. This affects demand. So it is hard to say. We have the light at the end of the tunnel. We have now the third vaccine. It was just announced, the Oxford vaccine, just announced. But in the US, they said that they'll start giving vaccines to healthcare workers by December 16. This will be mostly the AstraZeneca and the Moderna vaccine, especially the Moderna. It's local. It's so we'll see, because the issue with demand and especially container movement, they're future oriented. I mean, it takes time to you place the order, you make items are being made, then there's transportation. So it's what people are expecting to happen. And right now, it looks like people are expecting a good Christmas and good, and bounce back of the economy 4, 5, 6 months. By the way, we saw it after 2008. The economy bounced. You could see it, by the way, in emissions. In 2009, emission went down about 1.5%. In 2010, they were up 5.5%. I mean, bounced right back. I think people expecting a bounce right now. So we see pressure on transportation, and we will have shortages. We have already problem with trucking in the United States. We have problem with containers. Yeah, there'll be a tough. Expecting a somewhat strained period and higher prices.
Mm. And speaking about vaccines, and that will lead to another big challenge, and probably the greatest challenge for the supply chain profession in a lot of people's lifetime. How do we distribute it? And there's so many questions that are popping up, and obviously we don't even know. I mean, Pfizer seems to be -70, Moderna -20. It's not yet clear if they're going to be able to. I mean, obviously the last mile is another headache, because if you go in the States, I mean, here in Southeast Asia, for example, if you go to Vietnam in the mountains or to, you know, other remote areas, it's another problem in terms of how do you ensure that the temperature is consistent. How do you see, because I know that you always have a very practical and pragmatic approach, Professor, how do you see this vaccine distribution unraveling?
It's you already alluded to it, depending where. In the United States, despite all the political noise between the incoming Biden administration and the outgoing, Trump administration, who still, by the way, did not acknowledge that he lost the election. So only yesterday, they actually started the actual transition process. And they have to coordinate, of course, especially about the vaccine distribution. But let's be fair to the Trump administration. The Operation Warp Speed, which they put billions of dollars into, helped generate vaccines in 10 months, which is, vaccine in 10 years is fast. Doing it in 10 months is unheard of. It's actually the way both Moderna and AstraZeneca and Pfizer dealing with mRNA. It's a scientific miracle. I encourage the listener to try to look into what was done. And not only that was done fast, it's done with different type of chemistry, different type of biology, really amazing science. Be it as it may. Now the issue is distribution. In the United States, I see it less of a problem. I was talking to retailers like CVS. They're getting ready for this. They are getting with freezers, with even deep freezers. Pfizer itself developed what they call the suitcase, a container that helps take the vaccine from place to place. However, let me tell you one very interesting tidbit. Moderna is next door, is a mile from where I sit. That's their headquarters. In the last few months, all the top leadership have been selling their stock. And you think
it happened with Pfizer as well. I don't know if you saw that. The CEO sold the stock on the day they announced the vaccine.
Not only the CEO, all the top management is selling their stock. And the question is why. In my case, my wife just asked me this morning, why are they selling the stock? I mean, they're supposed to worth billions of dollars. I think they realize that even them, which is not as does not require deep cold as the AstraZeneca, as the Pfizer, is not going to be competitive with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Johnson & Johnson is developing a vaccine that has several great qualities. A, it can live in about 35 degrees, which is above zero even, Celsius. Second, it's only one dose. You don't need two. In all the three others, you need 2 doses. And some insider think that Johnson & Johnson is going to clear the market. And the others will go up, they'll do some, and then they'll fall, because and Johnson & Johnson is also a giant. They have, manufacturing, distribution, they have capacities that certainly Moderna doesn't have. It's a small company, and Pfizer has. In the United States, the distribution is being managed through the distributors. There are about 5 big distributors in the United States, distributor of medical supplies, and companies like CVS, and Walgreens, pharmacies. They already, I just got an email 2 days ago from CVS, come to us to get the vaccine. I mean, they're starting to advertise to get the vaccine. They'll even give you $5 if you come to them to take the vaccine. They think, they think that if you come to them, we get the vaccine, you also buy something. So it's so you see already companies are getting organized. You come to the local CVS, you see big new refrigerators. So they're getting ready. The question, however, is not, at the end of the day, the US, Europe, Singapore, China will do fine. Japan will do fine. The question, as you say, is some of the remote cases. What will happen in Africa? What will happen in a certain part of Latin America, most of Latin America? As you mentioned, some regions in Southeast Asia. They are hard to get to. There are no established channels of distribution. And it's not clear how it will happen. We have time, however, because given that it will take, I guess, 4, 5, 6 months to get to number of vaccines that can impact the world, we have time. And in the beginning, it will be, in the US at least, the first line will be healthcare workers. Then people who are in contact with a lot of people in manufacturing, in warehousing, retailing, old people at the same time, people who are vulnerable with pre-existing condition. It will be a while before there will be massive distribution to the entire population. In the United States, with this crazy healthcare system, it's also not clear who pays for this. So it's, in reasonable countries, the government just does it. In the United States, it goes to the healthcare system, and it's not clear how it's done. But they are the leader in the United States right now of getting it from the manufacturing to the distributors, actually the military. The United States Operation Warp Speed is being led by a general, and they're gonna mobilize a lot of the military channels to distribute to the distributor. From the distributor, there are established channels to go to the hospitals, to the CVS of the world, to the Walgreens of the world. It is still, as they say, no plane survived the first encounter with the enemy. All of these are just plans right now. It's there are a lot of planning going on, but how this will actually happen, we see already in China a black market developing for the vaccine. We see people are starting paying under the table to get vaccines. We'll see how it happens in other countries.
And I mean, there's some other challenges in terms of price points, because that might work in the Western economies. It won't work in emerging markets as a price point. I think China is working quite hard to get their vaccine up and ready at a different price point. But that in itself, will create certain, let's say, certain frictions. And
not only this, is one of the points that I'm making is that countries, unfortunately, like the US, have said, not only the US, EU actually did the same thing. They said that first we serve our own people. I mean, our people come first. This will create a lot of, problems in the future foreign relationship with other countries. I mean, it's because, first of all, it's stupid, because unless you vaccinate the world, you're not vaccinated. I mean, it has to be a worldwide phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon. So you cannot just vaccinate the US, because people will come from the outside, of course, and US people will travel all over the world. So you have to vaccinate the world. And the attitude right now of me first does not bode well to going forward. But it is simply be slower than otherwise should have been. But at the end, we'll get there. At the end, and especially I'm hopeful about Johnson & Johnson and other similars that are using the same technology that don't require this type of freezing, and require only one dose. This will allow, people to start going to Africa. And I also expect not only, especially the incoming US government is much more internationally focused, and they will, the USAID, the Agency for International Development, the World Bank, and others, I think, will foot some of the payment to vaccinate emerging economies.
Mm. And also the scale. I'll just and we're having quite a few. And Jonathan is sharing that one of the challenges that he also foresees is counterfeit vaccines, and that there has to be some sort of.
Absolutely. This, by the way, happens whenever there is a shortage of anything. We saw it at the beginning of the pandemic when the Dutch government had to throw out 600,000 face masks because they were subpar. They were sold as N95 and they were not even N10. they didn't screen anything. So whenever there's a shortage, we always see fakes, always. So this is something that we have to work, especially if something is not distributed to government, but just like we see in China now, there are other, call it gray channels developing when you have to pay some brokers who gets you some type of vaccine. Who knows what you're getting? So I would be very careful about this because, the wrong compound can make you ill and worse. So it's not cool. It's not even you get just water. You may get something bad. So
Yeah, and today I had a conversation with somebody at the World Economic Forum, and they were also making a strategic group to see how they can help and how they can propagate the information. But another problem that they're foreseeing for Europe specifically, I mean, it might happen in the US as well and in other countries, that certain people won't want to be vaccinated, and there's also a pretty negative.
Oh God, yes, there are two issues there. Let's talk about the United States, because these are, in the United States, first of all, the whole vaccine and then the public health issue became politicized. So if you are, I love the slogan of New Hampshire. Every state has the slogan. New Hampshire is live free or die. That's the slogan of the state. Right now, it's live free and die, because these people don't believe in masks. And a lot of Republicans, a lot of followers of Trump, just as a matter of, politics, which, by the way, it's completely stupid, but it is what it is. They believe that it infringes on personal freedom. Okay, so they don't want to wear masks. They also don't want to be told to take the vaccine. So that's one thing. It's a political side. Another thing is there are a lot of people who don't believe in vaccines at all. There are lots of. It started with a movement. People thought that the childhood vaccines create autism, which is proven to be totally untrue. But there's a lot of Hollywood celebrities who were propagating this, and they have followers. So a lot of people. So there are people who don't believe in vaccine. There are people who don't believe in this particular vaccine because it's politicized, and there are people who believe that because it was rushed and done so quickly, it's not going to be good for them. So in the United States, there are about 40% of the people who say they're not going to take the vaccine, and this is a problem because you need 70-80% vaccinated to create what's called a herd immunity, and that's a problem. I wonder how big it is in Europe, but in the United States,
it's pretty big. I mean, I'm European by birth, whilst I stay in Singapore. But yeah, it's a pretty big problem. So I think that will be, might be the mindset of the people might be a bigger problem than the actual distribution of the vaccine. But
let me make a comment here that this is a question of leadership. If we will see, for example, the leaders of the biggest countries in Europe taking the vaccines on TV, taking the shot. If we will see Angela Merkel taking it, and you will see, Macron taking it, and Boris Johnson taking it, And I hope Biden and some of his cabinet taking it. I think this will make people who say Biden, who's 78 years old, is the oldest president ever we had, taking the vaccines. People say, okay, maybe we should. I hope so. I hope
fingers crossed common sense will prevail. But as you know, Professor, common sense is not that common. So but we're getting quite a few questions, and it's the same permutation of the same question. And I want to ask you, and I know you have a very strong opinion on this. How will we see the recovery? When do you think we're going to recover? How it will look like, I think you're saying guacamole, or how do you have an expression?
Guacamole, the game guacamole. When you say.
Guacamole.
Okay. We already see it. We see different areas of the world, having going up in cases, in hospitalization and even death, and then they close down, and the cases go down, and then they start feeling good, and they reopen it. So different part of the world are going to open and close at a different time. This is already happening. In the United States now, we are in a unique situation that 48 of the 50 states are now in bad situation. When things this did not happen, even in March and April, there were difference. Now almost the entire country is in bad shape, and but let's move forward. In the next 4 to 6 months, the situation slowly will get better. I expect it to be with us forever, in the following sense: not wearing masks and social distancing, but being careful. We may have to take the vaccines annually or twice annually, whatever. And we will have cases throughout, but we are developing also therapeutics, medicines that can help make it less severe and reduce the mortality rate. So not so many people are going to die from this. The United States, by the way, just passed the quarter million deaths. So it's really a tragedy. But it will start going down gradually. Starting, I would say, we'll start seeing results in March, April, May. There, of course, will be other phenomena, because as we start seeing more and more vaccination, people will think it's over and start going again to bars and restaurants. So we'll see some other spikes. But overall, not linearly, but going up and down, the overall trend will be down. By the summer, we should start seeing flights starting to resume, people going on a flight and going to hotel. The first we're going to see is vacation flights. What will take a lot of time and may never fully recover are business flights. This is a problem for the airline, because they make most of the money on business, especially the big airline makes most of the money on business travelers. But the whole idea of jumping from Boston to Singapore for a 1 day of meeting, people will say, I can do it. Why do I have to spend $20,000 on the whole thing? Let me just do it over Zoom. And I think this will be a fundamental shift. Business travel is not coming back for a long while. But as I said, leisure will snap right back. People will start traveling. They're traveling already. So other areas, of course, by the way, the hospitality industry was hit the worst. I mean, hotels, airlines, cruise ship, whatever, and they'll bounce back. Other industries, many of them already bouncing back. The US, for example, unemployment rate was last month was 6.9%, down from 14% at the height of the pandemic. So even now the cases are high. The economy keeps chugging along. People kind of dealing with it.
I think I will step in for a second, Professor, because I think Rado has some issues with the internet.
No problem. No problem.
Yeah. Sometimes technology gets the best of us. But as you were speaking about industries, right? And I was wondering if there are certain players, and I know you do quite a bit of working consulting as well. Somebody was telling me, for example, in the automotive industry, one interesting trend is that the second-hand or the second-hand market is growing because people have a better or a higher demand for that type of products. It can be parts or it can be cars. Are there certain players or certain sub-industries that are doing better than expected?
I don't know, but by now it's hard to say, because you should have asked me this question in February. Which industry will do well? I would have become very rich because I would have invested in them. But let's say now that we look back, we see clearly a huge move to e-commerce. I mean, we saw this, of course, the native players being Amazon or Alibaba or JD.com are doing very well. But also companies, Walmart, Target, the big department stores moved online in force and are doing very, very well on the e-commerce. Furthermore, lots of small players have moved online with the aid of companies like Shopify and others, that their whole business is helping small companies get online. So Shopify had 1.3 million retailers on its system in June. So we see companies that are involved in e-commerce, all time in e-commerce, are of course doing well. Other companies that are doing well are companies that help other companies be flexible. So I think I gave the example in my presentation. I don't remember. I'm doing 3-4 presentations a day, so I'm trying to remember what I did for Alcott. But a company I mentioned is Flexe. I think I mentioned it. That does it's an Airbnb of warehousing, allow people to change the configuration basically on the fly. It's basically a platform play. There are companies like a lot of platform players are doing well, whether it's Etsy that sells stuff online from small artisans, or of course I mentioned the big e-commerce player. Amazingly, Airbnb itself is going for an IPO. It's doing fabulously well. I mean, who would have the entire hospitality industry is down significantly. Hotels are empty, or they do, I don't know, hotels in Boston use the room for students. All the universities had to spread the students, so the hotel, but they paid nothing. They don't pay enough to keep the hotel, hardly to keep the hotel going. But in any case, Airbnb, which at the beginning went down, is having record year. Because people are moving out of, look, let me tell you a personal story. I live in a condominium building, a large condominium building. I live on the 10th floor of a condo building. And I start realizing it's just not safe, especially in Massachusetts and the rest of the country. Cases are going up dramatically. So starting December 1st, we are moving. We took an Airbnb, a whole house, Airbnb in one of the suburbs. And for 2-3 months, we are moving there until the peak will get down. Apparently, it's a trend. We're not the only, we didn't know it, but we're not the only one. Everybody is doing this. So Airbnb is doing fabulously well. So there are companies that are flexible or allow flexibility in other companies are doing very well.
I know who's not doing well, my internet provider, and sorry for that. And I'm getting Flavio is saying that I should pay my bills. Yes, I will look into it. Yes. And Daniel Stanton, we had him live, and I had the same issue. So my apologies.
No problem.
On talking on e-commerce is one big growth, and it has grown incredibly, and probably is gonna be here to stay. But where I wanted also to ask you, Professor, is on that big discussion, move out of China, and I think you talk extensively about it in the book as well. that you don't see that practically happening, and that manufacturing shift from China is not happening, not at the volumes, at the scale as maybe some people have described it. And I'll just want to double click a little bit, and let's, with your sense of making things, keeping things real, I want to, give you the floor and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, of course, some of the discussion from the Trump administration was political. The Trump administration trying to tariff to move people out of China. It's not working. Tariffs are not working. The pandemic is not working. It's just not working. And the reason that it's not working is because most companies have spent decades building a whole ecosystem in China. And people who are not in supply chain, by the way, it's most of the media and the political class, just think about the final assembly stage of manufacturing. Don't think about all the bill of material, all the supplier and sub-supplier and supplier. There's a whole ecosystem in China that companies in automotive, in technology, spend decades building, and they train the supplier have the technology, and they are not there just for labor arbitrage, for low cost. Companies in China based on low cost have already been leaving China because labor costs in China have been going up. Case in point is garment manufacturing. The last stage of manufacturing, which is the cutting and sewing, have been moving to Sri Lanka and Bangladesh now for 5, 7, 10 years. In fact, many Chinese manufacturers are now in outside of China. On the other hand, because this stage of production requires only labor, basically, does not require big machinery, does not require significant capital investment, so it's moving out. However, take the textile, which is a very sophisticated manufacturing with significant machinery, significant capital investment. China has increased its export of textile to the world. So you see that the companies cannot just, after spending decades and billions of dollars, they cannot just pick up and move out of China. By the way, there's nowhere else in the world that you can find such a vast network of good suppliers at the cost that they provide. But it's not only the cost; it's the innovation, it's the responsiveness of Chinese supply. It's not easy to find elsewhere around the world. Add to this the point that China is a large and growing market. It's now the only big market that's worth being in, given what's happening in the US and throughout the EU. China is basically open to business. So it's no companies can afford not to be in China. And given, furthermore, I think that the nationalistic moves by American first, by Britain, by German, by Chinese, the Chinese are doing the same. All these nationalistic moves mean that there's more emphasis on actually being in China in order to sell to China. So I just don't see this happening in significant numbers. I should say that on the margin, some companies talk to me about the China plus one strategy, which means they're not going to leave China, but they will make some incremental investment, new investment maybe outside China, especially if it's the last stage of production. Not so much in supplier, because the last stage of production, they can put the label made in somewhere else, made in Mexico, made in the US, and this will alleviate the political pressure, because people don't realize that it's made in the US, but 90% of this is made outside the US. But the last stage is the US, so it will lift the political pressure. So some companies think about it, but I don't see big manufacturing moving out of China.
Yes, and that seems to be the findings that are out here in Asia. It seems to be reflected. And I want to ask you, moving forward, you deal with a lot of companies. You've interviewed so many chief supply chain officers. You work with them, chief operations officers, CEOs. What would you say are the key areas that companies need to focus on in order to maintain relevance in supply chain? And you spoke about resilience many years ago, and now it's all of a sudden everybody's talking about it. But what do you see as some principles, Professor, that companies and supply chain professionals need to apply to stay relevant in this abnormal normal?
Okay, so that we can think about two areas. One of them, preparing for the next disruption, putting some emphasis on resilience finally, something that I've been, talking about for 20 years. But then general flexibility, because it's not only resilience to a pandemic and other disruption, but changing political climates, and we'll see if the world may be bifurcating to China versus the West, or who knows. So let's talk first about a little bit about preparing for the next disruption. The company should take certain steps. First of all, they should map the supply chain. They should know where stuff is being made. And they cannot look at the SAP system, because the address in the SAP system is the address of headquarters, where you send the check to the supplier. It's not where the manufacturing sites are. You need to know where the manufacturing sites are. So if there's some disruption there, closure, fire, hurricane, whatever, flood, you know that this supplier is in trouble. What you also need to know is not just where it is, but what is made there and which product it goes into. So you need to know to map the bill of material into the location of suppliers. So if there's some disruption, okay, so we have less of a certain number of parts. We should try go elsewhere if we can. If not, we should find out that we cannot build all the product. We cannot serve all the customers. We have to notify them right away so they can take action and mitigate the problem. I talk about a lot of things also in my previous books about getting ready in terms of making sure that you can stand up very quickly in emergency management centers, making sure that you know how to do all the communications, making sure that you stand up immediately, much more frequent and thorough review of suppliers and review of quality control. We always say when there's disruption, there are quality issues. So and fakes. Let's make sure that we are quality control is strengthened. Knowing priority, which customer I'm going to serve, which I'm not going to serve if I don't have enough. All these things I'm talking about in terms of preparing for the next disruption. But disruption aside, several companies that I'm talking to take this opportunity to do a strategic review of the business, because there's nothing like a crisis to test the relationship with suppliers, with customers, with channel providers, with service providers, see who is with us for the long term. Even employees, who perform, who kept coming to, who kept working day and night in order to make sure the company stays alive, and which did not. So it's time to make some tough decisions. And I know several companies who are taking very, very wide-ranging reviews of the businesses, the division, the businesses they're in, what they should, which businesses they want to move in, looking at acquisition target, looking at selling some division. So this is a good time and the right time to make some strategic moves in terms of how do you want to position your company to the future. And one of the big things is make sure that you're flexible, because the one thing that we know is that change will keep coming, whatever is the change. So building in as much flexibility into the operation is paramount as you go forward, because with global warming, with political upheaval, the world is becoming less predictable, not more predictable. And any companies who works globally, actually any company at all, should have a lot of plan B, plan C, plan D, should do planning, should do exercises, should think about scenario planning, what could go wrong, how we would do it, and build the company to operate this way. It's not even that, it's getting the culture to anticipate that the forecast is not going to happen. So always create a forecast, or we must create a forecast, because we have to decide, how many parts to order, what to build, and all this. So we create a forecast, but also do a scenario planning. What happens if we are, 30% below forecast? What happens if we are 30% up? How do we manage in this way? Just by going through this exercise, it's important, because you socialize the employees to think that the world is not fixed. The world is not deterministic. Bad things can happen and good things can happen. But we want to take advantage of the good things and avoid and mitigate the bad ones. So going through this exercise and drilling this and doing, map-top exercise is important for changing the culture of the company to understand that the forecast is not the forecast. The forecast is just one point and it can change.
We're a very good point, and we're getting a lot of more questions, and I will tag you on some of them. But I want to take the last segment of our chat, Professor, to ask you about education and skills, because that is one, well, obviously hot topic. You are at MIT, and this lockdown and work from home and online has gone through the roof. MIT X is a brilliant, obviously, study that you and course that you have launched and grown over the years at MIT, and specifically for the supply chain profession. How do you see the future of education? Will we see more online? Will we see more hybrids? What's your thoughts?
Okay. It's really interesting. There were 10 years ago, a good friend of mine, Christensen at Harvard, wrote a book. Wrote a book about the end of higher education as we know it. He expected that we'll move to online en masse. And, the online universities like Phoenix University and Southern New Hampshire University will rule. Turns out that higher education is a little bit more complicated. First of all, people believe it cannot be done. Well, now we had an existence proof. It can be done. It can be done at scale. So, yes, the issue is, let me explain what I think. I think, in generally speaking, this is the future. But it's not near future, because there's one thing that is still hard for online to provide, and this is for undergraduate, it's just the maturity, getting out of home, living by themselves, having sex with people that they don't know, and so on and so forth. So it's part of the rite of passage. This does not need to be a university. It can be part, I always argue, I don't know if it's working or it's part of some type of national service. In other parts of the world, it's done in the military service, it's national service, and other separate from education. Education can be done online. This is a long-term cultural change of whole nations. So this will take a long while. But so I divided three types of education. There's undergraduate, there's the PhD, the researcher, and there's professional education, like the master program. It's not surprising that the first one who went online are the professional education, the MBAs, the supply chain management program. All of this went online first, because a lot of the students are practicing professional, they're working, and they don't have time to take a year or 2 years without a salary and pay outrageous amount to go to university. There's another bifurcation, and this is between the 200 leading universities. They talk about the United States, I'm more familiar with it. The 200 leading universities in the United States, the MIT, the Harvard, the Stanford, University of Pennsylvania, all those, they still have the cachet that is, I don't think they'll be impacted right away, or it will take a long time. The issue is, you see already business school closing in the United States. The secondary business, even not so much the secondary, some reasonably good business school have closed. So we will see some schools closing, but I don't think it will take a long time until it will affect the top schools, because there's cachet. You live in Singapore, and some parents, would love to say around the dinner table, my son is studying at Harvard, my daughter is at MIT, my cousin is at Stanford. It's part of being proud at the next generation, and they'll pay for it. They'll pay whatever it takes. And there are enough people who can afford it around the world even in the US, in Europe, to do it. Especially in Asia, it seems to be, a big thing.
Yeah, it is. I will not comment because I will get myself into trouble, but it is. I'll just put this comment from Daniel because he's praising MITx. So I just wanted to let you know, Professor.
Daniel Stanton, good guy. Okay, I know him very well, of course.
Yes, he told me that that I've been because last summit we had Richard Walding, so Daniel said that yourself and Richard Walding are his top mentors. I want to also ask you about skills, and when I say skills, I mean hard skills and soft skills. And when you look at the profession, and also with the hope and the reality that we will see more chief supply chain officers or chief operations officers moving to CEO, what do they need, Professor? What are those hard skills or soft skills, or it might be both, that you feel are more necessary for supply chain executives to step into the key C-level CEO and run companies?
First of all, they're already doing this. It's a stuff already happening, and I expect it to happen more as people now. One thing that happened during this pandemic is that people used to ask my wife, what do I do? And she used to say, he's in supply chain management. And they say, what is it? They don't ask anymore. Now she said, it's supply chain management. Wow, that's important. So it's, but it's not only my wife. It happens throughout the business world. The role of supply chain, the role of supply chain manager has been elevated. I don't think it's actually, in many ways, supply chain managers are very well suited for the top job, because to be a chief supply chain officer, you need to understand the entire operation, and you need to be tied to all the other functions in a company. I mean, you work all over the world. You cannot work without legal and all the international rules. You're subject to regulatory regimes around the world. So you have to talk to your government people. Of course, marketing and sales drive what you need to do. So it's all, you're already working throughout the organization if you do your job right. So I think the only thing that I would say, when I find in some case, even though by the time you got to be chief supply chain officer, you're probably okay, but at a lower level, at managers, directors, even VP, sometimes people are too detail oriented. I mean, because being a supply chain, you need to worry about the detail. It's all about making the whole system work. When you start being a CEO, you have to worry about bigger picture. So good supply chain officers, chief supply chain officers that want to move into the CEO role, of course, have to make sure, if they have opportunity to serve on other companies' board, to see how to do the board communication, how in fact to manage the board. Very important, because these are your bosses if you're on the board. So because this will give you a more wider view of the world, what you have to do. But aside from this, aside getting the more, the wider view, by and large, I think supply chain officers are well suited, and the good ones, Tom Cook, the good ones, the good are doing moving up and doing very well. Thank you. So
he particularly did extremely well. Yeah, absolutely.
We all remember what we thought. My God, Steve Jobs is dead. We got a guy who's worried about procurement and transportation to run the company. What will happen? Turned out it became a $2 trillion company. Unbelievable. It's the highest cap company ever.
Correct. Last question from me, Professor. If you are a chief supply chain officer, right, from that perspective, and you want to bring talent or skills that are outside of supply chain, maybe, I don't know if you poach at Google or you poach a data scientist, or I'm just thinking a little bit left field. Where would you go, and what type of, let's say, new, if you want to call it new, but fresh type of skills or functions would you bring into supply chain to make it even more accelerated in terms of adaptability, flexibility, and resilience?
Well, you talk about some of the obvious one, which means technology, whether it will be software, whether it will be data scientists, whether it will be AI, machine learning. You need some of these people, but the trick is actually not to develop your own IT department. The trick is to have people who both understand the technology and have a wider view of management. Because what you need to do, my ideal people, or people who can manage people who do AI, understand exactly what they're doing, but don't go into the weeds, because they have to set directions. They have to know what will be the impact on the supply chain. I see some mistake that people are doing. They're trying to build their own little enclave of experts. Maybe if this is done just to help advise the chief supply officer or the VP of supply chain, you don't want to compete with the IT department. You want them to hire the right people and make sure that they work for you. But the trick is to have people who know enough to be able to specify, to be able to choose between technology, to be able to choose between provider, to see what's real and what's PowerPoint. I mean, it's because you don't want to develop everything yourself, but you want to be able to choose wisely and be able to fit it to your need. So this is on the technology side. In general, you want people who can grow to be good managers, and people who can, the soft skill, work good with people, work good with management, don't get caught in sexual harassment, whatever. I mean, it's
the common thing. No, so thanks a lot, Professor. I just want to again be very grateful for your time. We've had a lot of questions. Sorry, I can't ask all of it now, but I will tag you later on. I want to encourage everybody, if you haven't already, follow Professor Sheffi on LinkedIn. There's a lot of great materials that you put out via MIT. And obviously look into the book, The New Abnormal. I think you can get it now via Amazon and via a few channels online. And stay healthy, stay safe, and keep helping all the companies and keep helping the supply chain professionals, Professor, with the new challenge ahead, which is the vaccine.
Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for